And I'm joined now by Labour's Deputy Leader, Harriet Harman. Welcome to you. Now, you've said as a party that you won't do any kind of deal with the SNP, but you must be very concerned with what's going on up there.
Well, obviously our team in Scotland are fighting hard for every vote, but Ed Miliband could not have been clearer that if he's Prime Minister, there will be no SNP ministers in his government. And Jim Murphy and Kezia Dugdale and our team in Scotland have made that absolutely the case. And of course, the reality is that Scotland needs to be liberated from the austerity that is being imposed by a Tory-led government and a Tory Prime Minister. And that is going to be the big choice that faces people, not only in Wales and in England, but also in Scotland.
According to this morning's analysis by John Curtis, it's perfectly possible that Labour and the Liberal Democrats together could have enough votes to govern after this election. Does the same apply to the Liberal Democrats, or would you be prepared to talk to them? Are you talking to them already?
Absolutely not. What we're doing at the moment is, well, because we've spent the last 5 years opposing the bedroom tax, whilst the Lib Dems have gone through the division lobbies with the Tories, imposing it on people who can't afford it. They've actually been voting with the Tories for a top-down reorganisation of the NHS, which has squandered £2 billion of NHS resources. We want to win our seats in Redcar, in Bermondsey, in Hornsey and Wood Green. We're actually fighting against them. The idea that we should be talking to them behind the scenes, they've put themselves on the wrong side, and we're on the side of a recovery
that you agree about Europe. Your proposals for NHS reform, well, actually they're going to spend more money than you are on that. There's lots of areas looking ahead they agree. A lot of their more right-wing people may no longer be in Parliament. Are you really saying you're ruling out any kind of agreement with the Liberal Democrats now?
Well, if we form the government, it's open to members of Parliament from other parties to support our programme when we're in government. That is open to them. But we are fighting seats in Scotland, Wales and England for an overall majority.
You wouldn't have a Vince Cable or a Tim Farron inside government?
Well, at this stage, with 26 days or something left before the general election, where not a single vote has been cast, you'll forgive me if I make it absolutely clear, beyond peradventure, we are not talking to the Lib Dems. We are not doing any deals with the Lib Dems. We have made it absolutely clear that there will be no SNP ministers in any future Labour government. You know, we think we've got a programme which can actually set this country on a much more optimistic path, with more job security, with better living standards, and rescuing the National Health Service. And that's what we're doing all around the country.
You talk about rescuing the National Health Service, but as of today, David Cameron and George Osborne are offering much more money for the NHS than you are.
Well, they aren't, are they, really? I mean, let's look at...
They're saying 8 billion, you're saying 2.5.
No, let's look at the reality of this. They have put themselves on a trajectory of extreme spending cuts. So there would be more spending cuts next year than there have been this year. There would be more spending cuts over the next 2 years than the last 5. And that is all laid out with the Office of Budget Responsibility. So they've set themselves on that path.
But they're not lying when they say there's going to be another 8 billion, are they?
But the next thing is, so firstly, that's the spending profile they set forward, extreme cuts. In addition to that, they have promised £10 billion of tax cuts on top of that. So the idea that they can actually put extra money into the NHS, the reality is the spending programme they've put forward is a threat to cut the NHS, which was one of the major reasons for people to vote Labour.
Are you suggesting this is a big lie when they say there's an extra £8 billion coming to the NHS?
Well, I'd say it's absolutely illusory, and people will judge them on their record and know that actually, having squandered £2 billion in a top-down reorganisation, that people are finding it harder.
So you do think it's dishonest?
Well, I think it's illusory, and you know, the reality is I don't think people will believe it anyway. I mean, I was in Stockton yesterday, and people know that they find it harder to see their GPs since the Tory came into government. They know they wait longer in accident and emergency, and that waiting lists are starting to grow. And the NHS staff are under extreme pressure. So I think that it's rather a sort of desperate lurch, but I don't think it'll cut any ice.
Let's turn to Labour's big announcement of the day, which is £7.6 billion from tax evasion and avoidance. Now, we know the figure. We don't know the details of how you're going to get there exactly, but I gather there's 10 proposals going to be announced in due course. Does one of them involve the change that the Miliband family used with reversion of duty?
They did not do any, Ed Miliband did not do any tax avoidance. He paid full capital gains tax when he sold the property he inherited. But if you want me to say what our tax avoidance...
deed of reversion, which does have the effect of cutting tax. Is that going to be part of the things that you you cut out.
Ed Miliband did not benefit from any tax evasion, and when he sold his share of the property that he inherited, he paid full capital gains tax on it, because at that point it wasn't his main home. But let me take you through some of the proposals that we've put forward, because I think that really
not too
people
long a
think...
list, but give us the really important ones.
OK, well, ending non-dom status, long overdue since it's been going on for 200 years. Making sure that hedge funds pay stamp duty when they sell shares, same as everybody else does. Making sure, and again, this is long overdue, our overseas territories are transparent in the ownership of companies, so that people can't shelter their assets in UK overseas territories. Making sure that rewriting the rules on private equity, so that actually they can't shift to capital gains tax when really at 28% they should be paying 45%. But you see, I think at the moment people are fed up with the idea that somehow the richer you are, that you can find your way out of the system. And I think people will be incredulous too that at this point in time the Tories are offering an inheritance tax
cut. I was going to say, there are lots of people who are not regarded, you may regard as rich, but most people would not regard as rich, who will be very glad of the inheritance tax change, who just want to hand a bit more down to their family, and you're against that. Why?
Well, look, the public finances, after us having to back up the banks after the global financial crisis, have been under pressure, and that's been made worse by the way the economy has been run by the Tories. Now, at the moment, you don't pay inheritance tax till your home is worth more than 650,000. It's not. We don't think it's a priority to give tax relief on inheritance tax. We think, for example, if your home is worth more than £2 million, you should start paying a mansion tax. They would want to give people with homes of more than £2 million inheritance tax relief. I mean, it is the polar opposite. And there is, you know, people face a big choice. It's becoming clearer and clearer as we get to the election how actually the Tories are helping a few people, and we want everybody to be better off.
As we watch this campaign unfold, we see the two Eds together again and again and again, talking about tax, talking about the NHS. We don't see you with them so much. Do you think you're being treated properly as the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, or are you being slightly shoved off to the pink battle bus and so forth, and the women's campaign down there? And do you intend to be Deputy Prime Minister if Labour wins?
Well, I'm Shadow Deputy Prime Minister, and I hope that we'll get into government. But actually, I don't think it's immaterial, us being on our pink bus campaign. You know, there were 9 million women at the last election who didn't vote, and this is a watershed election for women. So I think it's really important to be out there saying to women, really, almost whoever you vote for, use your vote.
Harriet Harman, thanks very much indeed for joining us.